So welcome everyone. And today what we're going to be doing is I asked our panel, which is Dr. Knudson-Martin and Dr. McDowell and Licenciado Fausto Lamont, who's also our esteemed colleague working on socioculturally attuned family therapy. And I asked them if we could talk about 3 different questions. And the first was just to introduce themselves in Spanish and English, whatever language is good for you. And then the second one is to talk a little bit about our collaborations with sociocultural attunement in the book, and then Fausto with both of your books here too, which is an electronic book. And then how do we see the impact of our work and our collaboration, however way we define it, and what other people have told us about the impact. So who would like to go first? I'm wondering, Teresa, if you wouldn't mind going first, since this was your brainchild, this was your baby, to develop the first book, the first edition of the book.
Okay, so do you want me to talk about, introduce myself and talk about the first question, or?
How about just introductions first?
Yeah, okay. So I'm Teresa McDowell, and I've worked as a family therapist for many years in a private practice before going on and getting my doctorate, and then teaching in a number of different schools. My focus has been on critical social theory and applying critical social theory in family therapy. So kind of going outside of the family therapy theories and models to look at what other people are doing in other disciplines, and then integrating those back in to how we might be able to work differently.
Thank you. And you want to say a little bit about how many years you've been in family therapy, and to give that context?
Sure. So let's see. I don't want to be counting again, but I think about 40 years. So I became a family therapist during the 80s when strategic family therapy, structural family therapy, those kinds of models were very popular. And family therapy was still new. We were still fighting for licensure and fighting for to be recognized and to get reimbursement and so on. So it was really the early days. And then I had a rural private practice for about 10 years. It was amazing. And then, like I said, then went on to teach. So I've taught for about almost 30 years and probably altogether about 40 years being in the field.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Carmen, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I also started in family therapy in the 80s. And one of the things I realized as I taught theories of family therapy is I had the privilege of taking trainings or seeing the work, all of the major developers of family therapy. So when we wrote the book, I have these founding people in mind. But a couple things stand out for me. Prior to doing my doctorate, which is when I started doing the clinical pieces, my first husband was doing international work with major U.S. corporations. So this was, colonization, if you want to think about it that way. But we lived among the local communities in Iran, in Jordan, in Senegal, in Costa Rica. And my experience of that was first how privileged I was to speak English, because in every single one of those places, kids, if not the adults, could speak it. Even though I tried to learn some of the language, there was always somebody who would step in because I was so no good at it and make it easy for me. And the other was just an awareness that there are so many different ways that people live their lives in the world in a real kind of humility and appreciation and humbling. And then when I came back to the United States, walking through a grocery store was almost surreal to see all the stuff. The other thing that I'm aware of is I started doing my work being interested in gender issues, having grown up during the women's movement in the United States. And it's always so much easier to be aware of what you, where you are not in the privileged position. So I could see the gender pieces, and especially as I started working with couples a lot, which I've always loved, I would see these patterns where people wanted to have a good relationship, but they were falling into automatic patterns where she would be coming from a more relational perspective, and he would be coming from a more individualistic perspective in these heterosexual couples. And I started seeing the power differences in that. And then over the years, as I worked in Georgia, taught in the Visalia, Visalia, that's California, Valdosta for 2 years, and had so many Black students there. And then Southern California, where I never had a class that was majority white, or almost never. And so I've learned so much from students, from their clients and my clients, and from all my colleagues, to expand my lens, and I'm still trying to expand my lens. So I better stop.
Thank you so much. And again, your whole career, your whole lifetime has been dedicated to the field of family therapy, and focused on gender and power has been your area of expertise in couples therapy.
If I could add just one other thing, it was a pure accident, but my COMAFT accredited program at the University of Southern California was in a sociology department. So I am my PhD is in sociology. So it makes good sense that I would bring that piece to the field of family therapy.
Thank you so much. Y Fausto, si quiere, puedes decirlo en español o en inglés. Estoy un poquito nerviosa, no estoy segura si todos los que están presentes hablan inglés, nos entienden o tenemos que traducir. ¿Nos puedes decir, Fausto, o si nos pueden decir?
Algunos son mis estudiantes, entonces igual podemos hacer el mix.
Okay, perfect. Spanglish.
Okay, yes,
Okay, como
perfect.
quiera. Thank you, everyone. Gracias por estar aquí. Bienvenidos. Fausto, ¿nos quieres decir quién
Yes, I'm
eres?
so nervous.
No, it's just
I'm a
us.
child.
It's a small
With all the
group.
experience you have.
Es
really.
un grupo íntimo. It's very small here. It's just us.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Really, it's a honor to stay here with you and Carmen and Teresa. Oh my God, it's amazing. Well, I'm a professor of psychology and family therapy in the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and also too in the Iberoamericana University. I don't know, it's a pleasure to stay here. I have a little experience in the family therapy. Well, I just say a little because with a lot of experience in this Zoom, it's a little experience. So I just want to clarify that. So the one thing I just stay working with a family, with a trans families, because in Mexico it's a big theme in this moment, the childhood trans families. So the orden thinking give me a lot of how could I say that, with a lot of thinkings about who could try to think with a gender perspective, with a social thing in a critic way and a lot of things. So I don't want to say more because I know it's other question to say. So
But Fausto, you're currently in your PhD program, as
Yes.
well as you also teach in marriage and family or couple and family therapy, and you also teach gender and cultural studies as well.
yes, yes.
Am I missing anything? And you've
No,
published two
it's
books.
perfect. It's perfect. It's my English the
Right.
problem here.
But we can go back and forth. And for those of you that are just joining, bienvenidos. Y yo soy María Bermudez y soy profesora también aquí en la Universidad de Georgia. Y aquí estoy con mi colega y estudiantes del programa Doctorado también. And I'm very happy to have all of you here with us. And so our main talk today is going to be talking about Teresa McDowell had the vision for publishing this book. And before that, she had published a book on critical theories in family therapy, which I'm already familiar with this book. And she invited Carmen and I to be co-authors to help on this journey of writing about all of the family therapy theories from a critical perspective. And the critical theories are, you know, intersectional theory. They're all feminist theories, queer theory, critical geography. I've learned a lot from Teresa in that angle, from that perspective, lat crit theory, etc. Like pretty much all the critical theories, Teresa had that at the forefront. And then from that one, we then were invited to write the second edition, which is this one. I'm doing it like this so y'all could see from there. And this one, we invited 25 contributors, which are people from our field, from family therapy, that they have identified as being third order thinkers and doing third order change in the community, whether it was through law, business, courtrooms, and their narratives are really just amazing. Like they just really honor us by telling us how they've been able to do our work. And as a consequence, Fausto then has published 2 books. And Fausto, I don't have the cover. Do you have your other book, the one with the flag, the pride flag? Do you have?
No, but
Yeah, no,
I could
I
share.
don't have the cover in front, but
Okay.
that one was the one that Fausto was an editor of that other book. And he invited me to help him, you know, edit, to review. We presented on his book. And then as the consequence of that work, he invited me to be a co-author on this one, which is called Third Order Thinking in Family Therapy, Critical Theories and Political Perspectives on Gender, Multiculturality, and Intersectionality. And that was Fausto's first book, and it's systemic family therapy and community and LGBTQ+. And again, it's amazing. And he invited me to share my perspectives on the book because he asked me to go over it. So between all of us, Teresa's book, Carmen on sociocultural perspectives. I'm butchering this, Carmen, the one with couples therapy that you published. Socio-emotional relational therapy. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. And so again, between all of us, this work has been circulating for a while. And now, and it's really taking, getting some momentum, and now in Mexico. And so what I would want to know then, maybe starting with you, Teresa, again, is what have you noticed has been the impact of socioculturally attuned family therapy, and what do you hope would happen moving forward with this way of thinking?
Yes, thank you. So I think we look at some of the major drivers for this work. You know, nothing gets created until it's time there's enough momentum across a whole field or across a large number of people to, you know, to support some idea. So I think at the time when we came together, we were looking, from my perspective, at sort of 3 things. One was most of our students, and ourselves included, have been working on becoming more socially aware, I should call it that, socially aware. And so we'd spend lots of time in the classroom and on our own trying to understand things like race and class and sexual orientation, what difference those make, and so on. But the awareness wasn't, there was a gap between having that awareness and then what you do in therapy. So we'd see highly, just amazingly aware students go into the therapy room and then freeze, didn't know what to do. Like, how do you apply it? So there was one issue. The second one was that the field was at a point where, we started with sort of systems theory, and then there was the feminist and critical critique, which of course continues on. And then there was social constructionism. And so there was sort of a skipping around of you're either this or that. So if you were a social constructionist, or you're using narrative therapy, then you couldn't possibly use systems theory. There was sort of these paradigms of thought were somewhat siloed. And so it was important to go another layer above that, to think about how we're thinking across these different paradigms of thought. And so you get into third order thinking is really thinking about systems of thought, and then it increases your flexibility in being able to integrate any of these ideas and ways of thinking, and knowing their limits as well when it comes to, in this case, into equity-based work. The third thing, and closely related to that, is we needed a way of thinking about all the models, all of our work trans-theoretically, so that if you're getting above into that third order thinking and you're thinking about how you're thinking about the models and what paradigms of thought they rely on, and you're thinking about these sort of divisions coming into the field from these big paradigm shifts, including systems and social constructionism, then how do you bring that together and find a way to make those systems of thought, systems of not only of organizational systems and societal systems, but systems of thought and ways of approaching therapy. So I think those were the three major drivers, at least for me, as I'm trying to figure out, like, how does this all fit together? So I hope that didn't take too long, but the other, so the impact, I think, has been primarily just to provide a language and a conceptual framework for what has already been happening in lots of ways. So you've got people who have been doing this work for a very long time. And then, so that's one thing. And so that you can think about and language it in a way that the concepts make sense and you can sort of more broadly apply the ideas without being seen as sort of on the fringes of something. So I think that's one. I think another way it has impacted the field is there was sort of, and that maybe somebody has a better way of saying this, but it seemed like through the years, as we would focus on critical social theory and equity-based work, we were seen as sort of making a sort of a moral initiative or choice, like it's a right thing to do because you want to make a fair society or whatever. And I think that's fine, but I think this work we've been doing is really, and this really reflects Carmen's work in why power matters. But we're looking at it now as a practical concern. It's just good therapy. Why wouldn't you? If you're thinking systemically about a family, why wouldn't you think broader systems and understanding those systems and the power dynamics within those systems to then better understand and connect the dots with individuals or couples or families? So I think that's the second thing it's done. And I think probably those two, and the timing has just been, it's been good timing in that people right now are very interested in this topic and trying to figure it out. So there has been a wide adoption of the ideas, and they're starting to take on life of their own, which is awesome. So you're hearing about these ideas and not separately away from us and our work. So I think those are the main impacts.
Yes, thank you for that. And I often get the question, how is socioculturally attuned family therapy different from the Bronfenbrenner ecological model? And the answer that I always give is Bronfenbrenner, although thought systemically, didn't have a critical lens or a critical perspective. What else would you add to that, either you or Carmen? And Fausto, what other thoughts would you have around that topic?
Around how it's different than Bronfenbrenner?
How it's different, yes, from an ecological model, and I get that often.
Well, I think the main thing that's different is that it's a clinical model. Yes, it's also a critical model, and I want to sort of echo everything Teresa said, because
Mhm.
those are also true. But so forever, I mean, probably now when I did my doctorate in the 80s, even though I was in a sociology department, we didn't have any classes that addressed any family therapy classes that addressed the larger societal context or gender. And I think that obviously has changed in the field so that it's part of accreditation standards and all of that. And so I think seeing in concentric circles has always been part of what it meant to be systemic. But how we practiced as clinicians, those models were separate, and they came from other fields. And people didn't know how to make the link between all this stuff, as Teresa said, that people understand, therapists and I find that clients, they get it, pretty easily. If you start asking them, well, what was the neighborhood like when you grew up in or something? So I think what there was a hunger for is, so what do we do in clinical practice? And that's what we tried to show in our work. And Teresa is the one who sort of brought us back to Bateson and talking about third order change. But for family therapists, learning theory is you have to build on what you already know. Well, family therapists already know first order and second order change. So going back and understanding third order change is a lens that people can get. And then still how to do that and is challenging. And I feel like there's a real kind of push and pull in family therapy, sort of not like in the rest of the country because it's not as contentious, but there are so many of us, I'm sure all the people in this call and in your room, who have been interested in this issue for a long time, and the impact of the larger society on clinical issues in people's lives. And then, I was just asked to speak at a practicum class a doctoral practicum class at Fuller University, where all their students, this is interesting, have to already be licensed family therapists. So these are licensed family therapists, and none of them licensed family therapists. This was all being really thinking about that social context and how those outer layers contribute to what's happening in this session. It was new to them. And they said they had not been taught it in any of their programs. And I hear people in psychology and social work saying family therapy is going away. So I think on one hand, there is this big interest in both family therapy and systemic work, including the larger system. And I think there's still a real pullback to individualism that probably permeates the mental health fields more broadly.
Reverting back to the medical model in many ways. Yeah, thank you for that. And Fausto, is there anything that you would like to add about how you see third order socioculturally attuned family therapy, either that or third order thinking and change? What are your thoughts about this work, and what led you to want to write your own book related to this topic?
Well, I just thinking about a lot of limits that the clinic traditional model has, because when we review all the third order thinking, I just have a lot of surprises, because when I just review Miranda Fricker, for example, talking about the injustice, but in the, how could I say that, this change you use in this book, that's amazing, because when you talk about the ecological model, well, the ecological model doesn't have this kind of thinkings. Don't review the sociological thinkings, don't review about the injustice in this kind of, who could I say that, premise they have. So I just have this kind of thinkings. So the other kind of way thinking, the third order thinking, when I just review the paper Teresa has about Pierre Bourdieu, for example, thinking in the structural family therapy, that's amazing, because when you connect, you have this kind of linkings about the sociological ways to realize about the injustice, about the relationships. You could use the gender, you could use the sexual diversities and the queer theory. And I don't know, I just think a lot of these kind of connections with critical thinkings with the sociology, the philosophy, and the other kinds of way to thinking, because in psychology, it's not usual. So I don't know.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And like what we're noticing here in the United States is that a lot of, especially master's programs, are using our book to teach critical theory along each one of the major models of family therapy. How is your book? I know we just published it, our book, your book. How is it being received so far? What are people thinking? Are people unhappy with it? I know it's, like unhappy in the sense that you're talking about, you're centering LGBTQ plus, and you're centering people with that are racialized and minoritized and problematized. Are you getting any, what we say, backlash? Like, are people getting upset about it, or is it being welcomed? How are people thinking about it?
Well, maybe it's a short time to to see that, because when we published that book, it's
January.
a book. Some persons send me a message, something like, "Oh, it's amazing! It's really good because you use the feminist, the third order thinking in Spanish, because we have a lot of troubles with the idiom." So, in a good way, some person expressed me her feelings about that, but in another way, we don't we don't get invited with some events to expose the book. So maybe, I don't know, I just think a little about that, but it's how could I say that, reflect about the Mexico has this kind of problems with family therapy, because one of the problems we have, it's a private services, it's a private education in some institutes. So maybe it's for that, because we published this book in a public university, for example. A lot of books in Mexico, they sell it from their own institutes, without review, without critical thinking, without share thinkings with other colleagues. So maybe it's for that, because in some way we reflect the problems in Mexico with this book. So it's comprehensive.
Yes, thank you. And I just personally have one more question for the panel, for the three of you, and then I'd love to invite to open it up for everyone. Yes, go ahead.
Comment on Brockenbrenner.
Please, yes.
So I wanted to echo what Fausto said. I thought that was exactly right about the philosophy and the different critical theories and so on. But I think Brockenbrenner represents, it was amazing work in a modern era. So that model is a modern model that explains things down to the tenets of, the tiny interactions. So he's describing and explaining this ecological model, which was very helpful for, But what we're talking about is not a modern framework. It is a framework that bridges or allows us to think about multiple paradigms of thought, like I said earlier, including critical social thought, systems thinking, and social constructionist thinking, and more, as more paradigms of thought. We haven't thought of them yet, obviously. Otherwise, they think paradigms of thought. But Bronfenbrenner is a very, not only what Carmen said about the clinical application, but also the thinking and the philosophy behind it is modern, and that's a huge difference. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. No, I hope that's helpful too, because that's a question that in our presentations and people will often ask that one. They're confused about that one. And then how do you see this, or I guess, what are your hopes for third order thinking in the field of family therapy? Like, how do you think, I know we just did that podcast and I said AAMFT needs to apply third order thinking to our own institution, that organize us as a field, as a profession. But what are your thoughts for third order thinking? What are your hopes in terms of advancing our field and our practice and our science? You could, Teresa, since you're on, you can keep going.
Okay, I see Carmen's ready to speak too. So I would say, echoing kind of what Fausto had said about, when you look at the reception of this work, you will lose something. Depending on where the society is and where the field is, people may or may not be ready or wanting to hear this kind of approach. So earlier on, my mentor took me aside and said, Teresa, you've got to stop this. You cannot keep talking about these things. You will not have a good career if you do. And so, the same thing is true at all levels. Of course, this is just a beginning. People will take these ideas and move with them and critique them and do all kinds of wonderful things to them, and that's great. But there'll always be a, sort of push and pull around, okay, that's enough, or how do we take these ideas now and bring them back into the status quo, either push them out or bring them back into the status quo, and in what way might these ideas move us forward or become part of the status quo in a way that allows us to move forward with less friction. So I think that's what I would be hoping for, is that the ideas get well enough established that they become an expected framework or a legitimate framework to move forward in our programs and our trainings. So when you see things like multiple programs adopting this book, that to me tells us that we're close enough to get pulled into the mainstream, and therefore people will entertain ideas that are a little bit outside the mainstream. You know what I'm saying? So I think the same thing with AMFT, and as you get these the momentum going and it becomes a sort of a legitimate and valued form of change, then I hope that it will continue to make a difference.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just jumping in with what she said, right? Thinking about, at least within family therapy, within COAMFT accredited family therapy programs, I think we did find that sweet spot where we were quite intentional about some of the language that we used in writing the book. Socioculturally attuned family therapy is more socially acceptable than a critical approach to family therapy, even though that's what it is. We didn't hold back from the truths that are important to tell, but so I do think that people are that we have been pulled into the mainstream to some extent, for better and worse then, because we always need the people like you, Fausto, who are willing to ruffle feathers and speak about what people aren't quite ready to say. But I would say that what I did in my writings throughout the years is I always tried to imagine writing to somebody who didn't come from the perspectives that I came from. And I tried to raise the issues in ways that they might be able to hear. And now just when I have chances to talk to newer scholars in family therapy, there are so many people doing such wonderful things that are way beyond what I could ever do. And I don't know what the next shift will be, but we did write an article, the three of us, you, me, and Teresa, where we called this that there is a paradigm shift in family therapy. Whether that shift is extending to the other mental health disciplines, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you say that new scholars are doing things that you never could do, but many, many scholars are also standing on your shoulders for all the foundational work that you have done, critical, important foundational work for us to do a lot, for us to keep moving your work forward. And Fausto, lastly, before we open it up for questions, how do you see, what are your hopes for this third order thinking and change in family therapy in Mexico? What needs to happen? What changes need to happen there?
Wow, it's a very good question and so difficult to me for my English, but I will try.
You can say it in Spanish or English.
I will try. So I just thinking on all the epistemologies of the Sud, because in Mexico, we need to think about the epistemologies of the South. What does that mean? This means about our intersectionalities, about what Mexico needs. For example, we need to talk about the poverty, we need to talk about the pollution, we need to talk about a lot of things about the mental health, for example. And the problem we have, it's when we read something about psychology, we try to reproduce without critical thinking. When we read third order thinking, I just thought, oh, what a kind of links we share from the epistemologies of the South with the feminist thinking, Mexican feminist thinking, and another critical thinkings. That's why in our book, we divide the book in 4 parts. First, we need to talk about the history of family therapy in Mexico, because all the papers, all the, how could I say that, all the documents we have only talk about the fathers, the pioneers, the heroes, something like that. Anyone talk about the neoliberalism? Anyone talk about all the private concessions we have in the family therapy, for example? Anyone talks about the mental health policy, for example? Anyone think about in what way family therapy stay in our mental health services? For example, it's a shame. So the second part, we talk about the traditional way to think and the change at third order thinking with the epistemologies of the South. We realize these kind of connections, and that was amazing because we have a lot of things in common. And the third part, we just talk about the training of third order thinking on family therapy in Mexico, for example. We just down all these ideas in the exercises. I just remember, Maria, when you told me, oh my God, we need to down all these kind of ideas in the material exercises, for example. And the last part, it's research on family therapy, because in Mexico, the other problem plus the other problem plus, we don't have research in family therapy, for example. So we just want to take back this responsibility. So that's the book in a short way. So we need to have more exercises like this, and I need more practice in my English or express myself in a good way. But it's I don't know, it's all the thinking I just stay thinking this moment.
Thank you so much, Fausto. Thank you. And we can all come. I don't know if anyone in the room here, if y'all have questions for either one of the three panel members, special guests. And yeah, and if it doesn't have to be in the room, it could be anyone on the Zoom. Si tienen preguntas, lo pueden preguntar en español, lo podemos traducir, or in English, however you can ask any one of us, any curiosities, questions, comments. If not, we can always keep just talking about these ideas. Oh, keep seeing people keep it. Anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I want to make a question.
Okay.
I don't remember which specifically, but someone mentioned about the comparison of the ecological theory and the third order theory. I don't know how is it being compared. You said that the third order theory is more for clinical work, and the ecological model is being used, I know, for another type of research and works. But how it is exactly this difference? How do you make this difference between the clinical work with this theory and the ecological model doesn't fit in the clinical model?
Teresa, would you like to answer that, or Carmen?
I can give it a try. I think that's one of the ways I'm thinking about it, clinical versus more family studies, research, and that kind of thing with the ecological model. But I think Fausto a minute ago mentioned epistemological frameworks, and this is really an epistemological difference when you're looking at the ecological model. When I talk about it being modern, in the modern era, there was a description, a focus and a search to define and describe what was true and what was real and what was absolute. So the ecological model is a statement about this is how things are, and this is the way in which they're related across these systems. And that's helpful. And when we use it, we need to understand that's the framework. That's the philosophy, the epistemological framework that they're using. So with our view, we're looking at things in a very different way. Like, you're not just thinking about concentric circles. Think about those being all over the place. You've got systems over here, and then power dynamics between systems, and you've got people's actions that are impacting systems at a local level, at an intimate level, at the same time at a national level or international level. So you've got this sort of, it's not so nice and neat in the circles. It's actually quite messy, and it's all infused with things like how we make meaning and social constructivist thought. What does it mean? How do dominant ideas prevail or silence some while amplifying others. What does it mean to have common sense? Is that which typically we think about as dominant sense? What does it mean when you go from one country to another, as Fausto was talking about, with adopting family therapy ideas in Mexico, and then us taking ideas from Mexico and South America and Central America, and using those in our work and owning those. So you look at the liberation psychologists and so on, and that group, they're the core of critical social theory and practice in the models we're using. So it's sort of like, I love what you said, Fausto, about we need to take it back and own it as ours. And so you've got this decolonizing framework going on too, right? So it's much more complex than the ecological model, which really doesn't talk about any of that. So you're seeing power, for example, at multiple levels and layers. You're looking at, Foucault's ideas about you could pick up power and use it anytime you want, but that's not exactly all of it, because there's certainly systems that make real material differences in your life. So we're more in line with social determinants of health, with critical political systems. I think it's just critical, just meaning we're examining power dynamics and how they affect everybody's lives. And I think that's quite different from Bronfenbrenner. So no matter how you're using it, if you're trying to apply Bronfenbrenner to a clinical framework, or you're trying to use it as a research framework, if you're doing critical research, you probably won't use Bronfenbrenner. If you're doing critical research, you're probably using ideas from Bordeaux and other people who look at social systems from a different light. I hope that helps. But
Thank you. Gracias, Rocio. Thank you for that excellent question.
Well, and it made and this conversation is making me think about, when I said, I think it was me who said, well, Bronfenbrenner wasn't clinical, but I didn't really know what I meant by that when I said it, because meaning gets created as we talk, right? And so one of the things about the modern epistemologies, the idea that somehow things are objective and this is just how they are. What the social constructionists and critical theorists have added to that is, as clinicians, what we nod our head to, or the questions we ask, it makes a difference. There is no way to be neutral. And so the socioculturally attuned framework is a way that therapists can organize what they see, make sense of what they see, and decide how to respond and translate our role as clinicians into that moment by moment of clinical practice, whatever other models you're integrating with. And so I think where I was coming from when I was thinking about the clinical piece, it's owning our role as clinicians, and then being accountable and responsible for the choices that we make as clinicians. And I mean choices just like who to ask which question, or how do we talk about somebody's depression or whatever.
Yeah, and simultaneously holding the micro and the macro and everything in between, because what we talk about in the book is the moment-to-moment processes that are happening in the room, in sessions, where we make these decisions about equity and justice, and helping the clients make the connections between their symptoms, their diagnoses, whatever it is that they're struggling with. And that's why Teresa coined the term socio-relational determinants of health, and how these larger systems affect people at the relational level with their families, with their partners, children, while they might be individually accepting that they created these symptoms, or somehow they're the problem, or they're pathological in some way. But sometimes we talk about how a lot of what their people we suffer from a lot of times are symptoms from injustice or larger systemic issues. And so that's making all those connections and connecting the dots, which is something we've talked about quite a bit. We do have 6 minutes left. We're almost at the very end, but I hate to say goodbye before anyone else wants to say one last thing, like a comment. When I do panels discussions, I always like to have the panel have the last word about what they would like to share and what note. How would you like to end your comments for today?
Before we do that, could we just get one question from your group? Just something.
One question. Oh, Liz she had a question.
Teresa, you actually went on to address some of the things it's not a question, more reflecting and connecting with this incredible topic. I'm thinking about being social culturally attuned, and how part of being attuned then, to go along with what you're saying, is about a practice of resistance, of ongoing resistance, and dismantling of systems, and just how, levels. And I was also reflecting on, you go from an ecological model into third order thinking, which is about learning to hold many more levels of complexity. And curious about sort of what's the next moment, particularly given some of the, new world order with pandemic. And so I'm just kind of here reflecting on levels of complexity and how much I appreciate this conversation. I don't think there's a question in there.
Thank you.
Maybe right here.
Well, I don't know if I don't know if I have time for this question, but I think just in alignment with, I guess, in the context of what kind of like Dr. Billy just commented on, I've been thinking a lot about Dr. Knudson-Martin, your comment around language and how we decide to approach language and using language as a tool towards change. And I think just in transparency, I tend to go on the other side of things where it's, be very direct about, what's saying. And I don't really, I don't know if this is for myself or maybe it's just an act of resistance, and that I try to be very intentional about not caring for handling the reactions of, what would usually be the colonizer in the conversations that I'm having. That being said, I see the value in doing that work and, making and how we package things and, kind of putting some safeguards in terms of how other people will respond to them. But I guess my thoughts, just kind of thinking on what's next, is in doing that, who are we packaging like these ideas for, and who are we intending to reach them? Because if I see us working towards maybe generations who were less exposed to these ideas in their education, in the ways that, like, for example, my generation will have been, I understand the need to kind of wrap those ideas differently. That being said, the incoming generations, the future family therapists, or generations that I hope would have the capacity and would be more prepared for, more direct conversation. So that's just kind of where my mind was going in terms of what comes next. What's the next step of how we're talking about these things and bringing critical thought into family therapy.
Yeah, and Teresa, you wrote the book on it, so.
Well, I think I want to address that because one of our conversations between the three of us was just about that. So I'm the one that's always sort of in your face a little bit. Like, I would have named it, I don't know, read this or else. It would have been something no one would. And Carmen is just a master at thinking about how do you frame things and use language that will help, for example, that book be adopted by so many family therapy programs. So there are, some people adopt the earlier book, my little book on applying critical social theory to family therapy practice, but not as many as would look at this title of sociocultural attunement. And so it is always, in any work that you're doing relative to creating third order change or transformation, you're always looking at what's the context, how do we collaborate, when do I think just speaking out will make a change because everybody will see my point. And how is that for me part of my privilege and part of my developmental stage? So when I was earlier in this, I thought, well, I'm a white woman with lots of privilege from that positionality, and I just can say what I think. So I just say what I think. Well, if it doesn't work, and you lose some of your leverage for change, then maybe it's time to rethink it. Maybe instead of just standing up at a meeting and saying, this is what I think, because, I think, well, my voice should count enough that everybody will listen. Maybe instead what you do is you get together with a few colleagues across social locations and you come up with a plan and a strategy. And maybe the strategy is to get a member of your group into a key position in the field. And then maybe it's to bring in stepwise, bring in certain kinds of expectations for accreditation or whatever it is. But as you move forward in the work and you become really, I think, more sophisticated in your ability to create change in any system. Just like you would create change in a family, you wouldn't just go in and say, okay, here's what's going on. You're not being fair, blah, 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 blah. You wouldn't do that because that will knock them out of the water. So will the other systems, educational systems, so on. So as time goes by and contexts change, your ability to be direct, indirect, use whatever language you need to use will be totally context dependent. So today you can go and talk to some people directly. Otherwise, you're going to have to codify your words. And you always got to read. And one of the things that I learned from my dissertation, and I'll stop talking, is we looked at resistance. My dissertation really was on resistance to racism and family therapy education. And we talked about a number of ways people resist, which I won't go into. But when I asked them how they decided whether or not to be direct and speak out about what they were experiencing, basically the themes were three things. Will I be believed? What are the potential consequences to me? And what's the potential for change? So if any one of those things is low, you probably don't want to speak directly. You want to do something different. So I think for me, that was really helpful to look at. Resistance comes in all kinds of forms. And you should have a big repertoire of tools for resistance and to create change. That's it. I'll stop.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Gracias a todos por estar aquí. Y aquí también en la Universidad de Georgia. Thank you all really for witnessing these this shared experience and all of y'all being here. Gracias a todos de veras y espero que tengan un lindo día y gracias por compartir y voy a mandarle toda esta presentación a Fausto para que pueda compartir con ustedes, and I will share this link with all of you and whoever's interested so y'all could have the recording as well. So thank you, everyone, and hope we can do this again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Carmen,
you.
Teresa,
Thank
Fausto, mil gracias. Thank you so much.
Good to see you.
Carmen, Teresa, thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao. Thank you.